Also, as a reminder, for more Microsoft webcasts, you can visit microsoft.com/webcasts. And again, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's TechNet webcast, Securing and Tuning Internet Information Services 7.0. And now, without any further delay, I would like to turn today's session over to our presenter, Nazim Lalala.
Thanks, Tracy. Welcome, guys, to Securing and Tuning Internet Information Services 7.0. My name is Nazim Lala. I'm a security engineer in the IIS team at Microsoft Corporation. So the agenda for today is basically we're going to start about talking about performance, new features on IIS7, and a few tips and tricks on tuning IIS7 as well. Then we'll switch gears and talk about security, new features, things that we have improved on, things of that nature. And finally, we'll end the talk talking about Server Core, Windows Server 2008. So let's just start with the perf improvements that we made. So back in the IIS6 days, we actually pulled the HTTP stack down to kernel mode, and we've done similar things in IIS7. On Windows Server 2008, we've actually pulled the SSL layer and the Windows authentication layer down to kernel mode as well. And preliminary tests in the performance lab for common scenarios show up to like 150% performance improvement on these. Also, we have revamped our compression, so we have better static and dynamic content compression. Also, we have beefed up our output caching, and we have made it much more configurable and more accessible as well. And so we can just use your iNet Manager console to configure all your configuration options for output caching as well. The other thing we've done also, we've worked on extensively in Windows Server 2008 and IIS7 is improving scalability. So now it's actually a reality where you can actually host thousands of sites on a single server box. Also, we're shipping fast CGI. So for all those people who want to run PHP applications and PHP application solutions on Windows, you actually now have a great option. With that, we just step into our first demo. Just to quickly let people know, all the demos that I'm doing today, I'm actually doing on my laptop, and I'll be using a VPC image on my laptop. So the numbers are not going to be absolute. Obviously, I don't have a server machine here. The demos are just to give you a gist of how things scale and how things improve. So I'm just going to get into my first demo. All right, here's my VPC image. And so the first demo, I'm going to show improvements that we made and how things change on your PHP application when you switch over from using CGI to fast CGI. The tool that we're going to be using today is WebCat. WebCat, you can actually download this tool. It's a free download on iis.net/downloads. And essentially, it's pretty simple. Actually, let's just look at it. So what I'm going to be doing today is, let's look at this little settings file. So as you can see, we have a transaction here. And the transaction basically is I make one request to phpinfo.php and expect a status code of 200 to be returned. And I'm going to run this through some sort of stress engine, which is WebCat. And I'm going to have a warm-up time for 5 seconds. And I'm going to run the test for 30 seconds and then cool down again for 5 seconds. That's all I'm doing, right? So let's just run this. And essentially, I have a little batch file that I use to run WCAT. So I kicked off the test. It's going to take a little time to warm up. As you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, my CPU is pegged. It's actually doing a lot of stuff, stressing my little laptop out. And let me just reposition this window. All right. That's probably slightly better. All right. So you see we get about 10 requests a second right there. Drop down. We actually warmed up at 13 requests per second. And we're down to 10 and probably entering the cooldown period right about now. Let's see. Still chugging along. And all right. We're done. Cool. So what we've done is we've averaged about 10 requests a second. And this is actually on CGI. Right. So let's just go back. And I'm going to bring up iNet Manager, which is our console to manage your sites and all your configuration data for your site as well. So here's my So I go to the server root right here, and if I look at my handler mappings, which is right here, and I will switch to ordered list, you can see that PHP via CGI comes before fast CGI, which is why I was using CGI. Now I'm just going to swap those around so that I actually go to use fast CGI module. I'm going to minimize this, and we will just run the exact same test again. So we did about 10 requests a second on CGI. So let's run the same set of tests again. We're pegging the CPU, going through warm-up phase. See what we get. So we can see in the warm-up, we're already looking at about 259 requests a second right now. I'm going to let it keep going. And hopefully, when this thing ends, right, 23. All right, cool. So it's done. And you can see that we actually now showing about 283 requests per second. It's several orders of magnitude more than what we got just using CGI. So I'm going to go step back to my slide deck here really quick. Cool. All right. So a few tips and tricks on how to tune IIS7. So one thing that's really useful is output caching. And even dynamic pages usually aren't absolutely dynamic. They're sort of semi-dynamic. I mean, the best example is, let's say you have a blog site, right? If your blog site is not very volatile, as people are not authoring the pages you're actually viewing, people are not actively authoring blogs that are actually going on there, your page is sort of semi-dynamic because in that time frame, till anyone else authors a blog article, everyone's seeing the exact same page. So even in these semi-dynamic kind of situations, people actually benefit from output caching. And I'll give a demo about that a little later. The other cool thing you can actually do is, especially if you're running, let's say you're running a media server, compression comes in really handy because bandwidth costs money. The only caveat there is that you can use dynamic compression, but it's at the cost of a slight CPU overhead. So you need to make sure what your profile is for both your server and your application, and make sure you balance things the right way. Also, what we're seeing these days is that people are moving away from 32-bit servers, and pretty much everyone's running on x64, and you have multi-core. And Windows Server 2008 has really been built around scaling extremely well on new multi-proc machines. So if you have a new beefed-up server, you're probably going to get much better performance out of Windows Server 2008 than you would on a Windows Server 2003 box. Also, I mean, who doesn't want thousands of requests per second, right? It's all about tuning and making sure you get the most bang for the buck. And one of the ways you can really do this is by decreasing the amount of time that you spend in your request pipeline. And the easiest way to do this is remove modules that you don't need. So if you're not using BASIC or Windows authentication, it's just a static file server on Anonymous. Make sure you just take out all the modules that you're not using, right? So you actually get two benefits, right? You will actually decrease the time per request, and also your memory footprint will actually go down too, right, for your worker processes. Every once in a while, we change some applications, and things just come to a dead crawl. So in cases like that, we actually have a feature called FREB, which stands for Failed Event Request Buffering, and it's sort of like ETW, but not as granular. And we have gone through a lot of pains in the IIS team on instrumenting the entire product so that you actually get a lot of really cool information in a FREB log. So FREB is definitely your friend. If when you're investigating things like slow apps and things falling over and diagnosing, so it's a really good diagnostic tool. Also, we've spent a lot of time in IIS7 with the integrated pipeline, so that the star script map solution that you had in IIS6 was really slow, and now the integrated pipeline is much faster. And we've also done things like we actually pulled down things that were like URL authorization, which is an ASP.NET thing. We actually pulled it down one level in the stack and made it available to other requests besides ASP.NET as well. So yeah, as we just demoed, PHP applications, and there are so many cool PHP applications out there, right? There's entire platforms built around PHP applications like Zen, and there's things like PHP BB that are really popular. And CGI really wasn't a good option on Windows boxes to host PHP applications. Sorry. Um, and so we just demoed that fast CGI is a much faster and much better option. And another really cool trick is, when you go to a website, you usually don't go to, let's say, Microsoft.com/default.aspx, right? Most people just go to Microsoft.com. And then what happens on the web server is that we have to look up the default document, right? And the default document, when you look that up, you pretty much have to go through a list. And, you do a hit or miss through a list. So if you know what your default documents are and you put it on the top of the list, you're going to get a huge performance improvement. And it's such a simple step to do it, too. Once again, the little tool that I was using, that I was demoing the performance for, it's called WCAT. It's available for download on IIS.net/downloads, so you can play around with it, and you can probably use it for analysis as well on your servers. All right, so let's just go back to the previous demo that we just did. So we got about 283 requests per second. So what we really do is quickly we'll go enable output caching. We talked about really a little while ago. All right, so let me go in here. Let me go default website. I'm going to drill down to my app, my PHP app. And down here in the IIS tab, you're going to see this thing called output caching. I'll double click on it. And right now I have no rules for output caching. So let's just go ahead and add a rule really quick. So I have a PHP application, so I want to cache things for PHP extensions. I'm going to do user mode caching. I'm going to cache it, let's say, for 30 seconds. So I'm going to invalidate the cache after 30 seconds. And I have incoming requests that have multiple query strings, but I don't want you to invalidate the cache. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into advanced and say query string variable store. So it actually does not invalidate the cache. It caches everything for all query strings as well. Say OK, and we're going to minimize this. And we're going to go back here really quick. All right, and we're going to run the test again. So we had about 280 requests per second. Let's see what output caching does for us. Once again, stressing out a little laptop. You'll probably get much higher performance on a real server box. This is just to show you how it scales. So you can already see we are about 762. So we have more than tripled. 900, almost 4 times as much. Still going, still staying about 950 requests per second. And I think it's going to pretty much end at that note. So, yeah, cool. So we pretty much gone to 963. So we actually more than tripled our output. So this is just PHP application, fast CGI with output caching turned on. All right. Let me go back to my slides. So before I just switch gears and go on to security, one of the things I want to talk about is people probably have a question that, well, we used output caching, and then we also have compression for dynamic content. Can you actually use those two together? Well, you can absolutely use those two together, right? And depending on sort of application, we actually give you the ability to cache before or after compression as well, right? Depending on what your application profile looks like. All right, so let's move on to security. So we've built on a rock-solid foundation of IIS6, right? And we've just pretty much taken that one step further. We've polished up things that we already had. We've added new features. We improved things that we had previously existing as well. One of the things that we'll quickly talk about is, and I'll have a quick demo on this, is componentization and reduce attack surface on server core. Also, we worked pretty hard on sandboxing, and I'll have a demo for you guys really quickly on something we call application pool isolation. So you have multiple application pools within the same site, and yet we can isolate between the application pools. We'll also quickly talk about some security features like request filtering. For people who have used IIS6 before, request filtering is essentially V2 of a tool that we shipped on IIS6 called URL scan. and now it's available to you as a module. We'll also quickly talk about URL authorization. It used to be an ASP.NET feature that we actually pulled down into the IIS stack, so you can actually use for requests as an ASP.NET as well. So here's a quick little view of how we've sort of componentized IIS7. And the main thing here is we want to make sure that we decrease the surface area for attack. Another thing also is that we want to make things performant, right? We talked about, earlier I told you that if you want to have thousands of requests per second, you really need to make your request pipeline lean and mean, right? And so essentially we have really modularized the structure so that you can pick and choose exactly what you want for your application or your server, and then just turn everything else off. That way you don't have to service other modules that you pretty much don't have any security exposure, and at the same time you have all the perf benefits as well. So let's just quickly do a demonstration for componentization. I'm just going to minimize this guy. All right, so let's close this guy. So you see that I have a bunch of applications on my site, and one of them is actually it's an ISAP module. And what we're going to do is I'm going to quickly switch to application host.config, which is the base configuration file which is like sort of the master configuration file for the IIS web server. It's got a bunch of stuff in it. I'm sorry I don't really have a nice looking UI tool to show you XML, but this will sort of give you an idea. It's well-formed XML, very easy, Xcopy deployable, no more custom tools, just everything, all the configurations in XML. But one of the things that you notice is my default website has a whole bunch of handlers, a whole bunch of modules. It's got a whole bunch of stuff that that my ISAP probably doesn't really need. So what we're going to start doing is we're going to start trimming things down to make it a little lean and mean. So I have some stuff commented out here. I'm going to quickly cut and paste. All right. And one of the things that you'll notice immediately is this location tag. And location tag allows me to scope down configuration to a particular section, right? And the section can be a site. It can be an actual application underneath the site. And so in this case, we're scoping down to default website / ISAP. So ISAP is an application underneath the default website. So what we're going to first do is we're going to clear out the list of modules, and we're going to clear out the list of handlers that we have, right? I'm going to save this application host.config file. I'm going to go here to IE, and I am going to make a quick request to my ISAP. And sure enough, I come back with nothing, right? Well, I get nothing because I really have nothing. But this really it's not very helpful if, I really want to go and trim this thing down. I need some sort of feedback to assist me through this process. So what we're going to do really quickly is we are going to go and get the custom error module. And the custom error module, what it will do is it will give me some friendly errors if I am an admin running locally on the box. So let's just quickly add custom error module. Let's just go back to my ISAP, and sure enough, I get a nice little custom error. And it tells me, well, I'm not authorized or authenticated. And, well, that's obvious because I really don't have anonymous authentication module installed, so I really can't anonymously authenticate anymore. So let's see if we can just quickly add that. So we will go and add anonymous authentication module, which is right here. I'm just going to copy that and paste it down here under my modules. All right. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly copy down my ISAP module. So if I look at my ISAP module, it is right here. Take that, quickly copy that down as well. There's my ISAP module. And the only thing that'll be missing is my handler. So let me just quickly copy down my handler as well. My DLL, my ISAP DLL. That should be my handler. Take that, and I'm going to come down here and add it to my handlers list right after clear. All right. So now for the ISAPI application, the only modules that I'm going to be loading are custom error module, the anonymous authentication module, and the ISAPI module, and I have only one handler for it. So let's just go here, make sure this works. Sure enough, it works, and my little ISAPI, all it does is it sleeps for a little while, and you can actually pass the argument in on the query string. So I can say sleep for 10 milliseconds, and sure enough, it sleeps for 10 milliseconds. And what we have essentially done here is that we've literally removed everything that we don't need. So, once you're done debugging the stuff, you can actually go ahead and remove custom error module as well, right? So now it's pretty easy to, essentially if you look at the requests that you make to this application, they're going to be really lean and mean too. The worker process is going to spin up for this application as well. It's going to consume much lesser memory because you usually don't have any modules that you don't need. So you can really use this mechanism, and I'm just showing you an application host config, but you can write your own little tools because this is well-formed XML, so you can write your own little tools to kind of like automate this process if you want. And of course, since this is XML, it's Xcopy deployable across multiple servers as well. All right, so let's just switch back to your slide decks. All right. So improvements that we made in IIS7. So one of the main requests that we kept getting in the IIS6 timeframe was feature delegation. So you would have a scenario where let's say you have a hoster that hosts 1,000 sites. He does not want to give admin rights to his actual machine to all those site admins, right? He wants to have separate identities for them, and then he wants to be able to specify rules within which the site admins will be sandboxed. But after those, within those rules, they should be able to do whatever they want. And so we've actually added that feature now. We have remote configuration delegation. And so essentially an admin can grant non-admin users the ability to manage their sites remotely. And you wouldn't use multiple tools. You always use the same little tool that I showed you, the INET Manager. So you can just delegate administration using that as well. The other big architecture improvement that we made, we worked pretty hard in IIS6 on site-level isolation. We've taken that one step further as well, and so now we have sandboxing at application pool level as well. I'll just give you guys a brief demo about that a little later on as well. So back in the IIS6 days, it was the ops people it was pretty hard for them because they had to manage all these anonymous users. And you had all these, different identities that you had to manage just with anonymous user, like anonymous authentication, anonymous users used to work. So we've got rid of all of that stuff in IIS7. And what we have done is we have just two built-in accounts. We have an iUser account, and we have an IIS_iUsers group, and that's it, right? So we got rid of IISWPG, the iUser_machine name account. And the other good thing is that now we don't really need to have a specific anonymous user that someone needs to maintain as well, right? Don't specify anonymous user anymore. We just pretty much run the worker process. Identity does the job. So that should make things really easy to deploy for operations and really easy to maintain as well. So let's just quickly take a look at application full isolation. So let me go back to my VPC image really quick. I'm going to minimize this. Actually, just let me remove all the stuff that I just added. All right. Save my config file. And let me just bring up INET Manager. So I have two applications here, Contoso and Fabricam. And if I go into my application pool section, I actually have two pools for it too, Contoso pool and Fabricam pool. Contoso, if I look at settings, Contoso runs in its own pool called Contoso pool, and Fabricam similarly runs in its own pool called Fabricam pool. But the one thing to notice here is that both of these applications are actually running in the default website, so they're actually in the same website. Right? And what I'm going to show is how we actually do app pool level isolation in IIS7. So I'm going to quickly go over to the website on Contoso, and it's a simple little page, just prints out the current time. And let's say one day some controller user decides to get smart and writes a little application called hack.aspx, where you can specify a path and it'll attempt to open a file. So let's just quickly see what happens if I try to open, my master configuration file, which we actually call application hoster.config. So what happens if I try to open that? Sure enough, it gives me access denied, right? So Contoso user knows that that Fabricam has its website, has its application hosted on the same website as well. So, and since I know what my physical path is, I know what their physical path is as well. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to open up some of their files from my app. So let's go to fabricam.com hash, and let's say Fabricam has some sort of secret. They have a file called secret.txt that they store in there. I'm going to go try and access that file, and sure enough, I get an access denied. But if I have my own secret in contoso.com, and if I go and try to access my own secret from my application, sure enough, I get the secret, right? So how does this really work, right? There's two steps. So the first phase is pretty much automatic for you, right? It is basically configuration isolation. So what happens is that when you have things in two different application pools, we actually isolate the configuration needed for each one of those into separate temporary application pools. So let me show some of the stuff to you really quick. So if I go into init pub, go into temp, and go to the app pools directory, you'll see that I have two configuration files, one called fabricam.pool.config and one called isapi.pool.config. So if we open up, let's say that, Fabricam and Contoso. So let me just quickly open up one of these guys, Contoso pool, right? And if you scroll down and you look at your site section, you pretty much have things that only pertain to you, right? In this, I mean, I have no information here whatsoever about Fabricam, right? So I actually isolated these two things from each other. And the other interesting thing to note is if I look at the access control list on this file, the view doesn't look too good, but you will notice one thing over here. There's something called IIS app pool / Contoso pool. So what we do is that every time you actually create an application pool, we will actually create a security identifier for you. And you can use the security, and we by default, all the configuration files, we access control them using the security identifier. And the interesting thing is that you can actually use these to also isolate your content, right? Which is what we really did. So by default, we want anonymous users to actually have access to your web page, right? But I had a file in there called secret.txt, and I want only people on my site to be able to see that. And so what I had done here was, if I look at the echoes on secret.txt, I actually removed anonymous user, the anonymous users group. I removed the users group from here, and I basically gave read access to IIS app pool Contoso pool. That way, people who are running the Fabricam app will have no access to this file, right? So now I have total application pool level isolation, right? I have no access to any of the files that I echo this way. So that was a little app pool isolation demo. Switch back to my slides really quick. All right. So with the integrated pipeline that we implemented and just worked on in IIS7, one of the cool things that we get is that all your applications, even non-ASP.NET applications, now have access to a lot of cool things that the .NET Framework provides you, right? Like your membership conditions, your roles, your forms auth, URL authorization that we pull down as well. So you can actually have a PHP app that uses forms auth, or you can actually have a .NET membership condition enforced on your PHP application as well, right? We talked about URL authorization quickly before as well, right? And I'm going to I'll just talk a little bit more about URL authorization. So in the previous application pool isolation demo that we just saw, so one of the things that you notice, actually let me step quickly back to this guy right here. So one of the things that you noticed was the way I had to isolate this actual content secret.txt was I was using echoes. So we have gone through great lengths in IIS7 to make things really easy to Xcopy deploy, right? So we have this great XML-based configuration. But this echo stuff is really not very easy to Xcopy deploy, right? So what we have done is we've just, we pulled down URL authorization, so you can actually enforce URL authorization rules on things that are actually not ASP.NET applications, right? So what you eventually do is you would have a URL authorization rule in your local web.configuration file that would basically say restrict access to secret.txt to only users of a particular group, right? And now once you have this, you literally have an XML-based web.config file. And so if I were to set up a web form and I just need to mirror this across a bunch of machines, as simple as just Xcopy deploying the stuff across all the machines, right? And then I have all the authorization rules and everything's just copied. I do not have to deal with writing scripts to mimic what I have, the echoes that I have on my current machine, because those things are just extremely error prone. This is just as easy as Xcopy deploying. So the other thing is, like, for people who have used IIS6, back in the day we shipped an out-of-box tool called URL scan. And the request filtering is pretty much just URL scan version 2. We polished it up, we beefed it up, added more features to it, and we now have just made it an official IIS.NET module. And request filtering is actually really powerful. You can do a whole bunch of things with request filtering. You can filter based on verbs or file extensions or double encoding, a bunch of request limits, hidden segments, headers, you name it. So let's actually take a look at a request filtering demo really quick. So I'm going to quickly go back to my VPC image. All right. And so I showed you the quick little ISAPI a little while ago. All right. So I have a local host, and I had an application called ISAPI, and then ISAPI DLL called sleeper.dll. Let's just assume that sleeper.dll. So I have a server, and this is actually a very important application for me, right? And so I really want to crank down the security on this. So what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to start using request filtering to crank down the security on this. I'm just going to demo just this using just application host.config. I'm just going to add all the rules in application host.config just to show how easy it is. You don't need multiple tools. You either do it through the UI, or it's extremely easy to do this stuff even through the base configuration. No complicated metabases, no metabase editors, nothing of that sort, right? All plain text. You can just read it. Very easy to do. So let me just go quickly. I'm going to copy this section over. Let me just go step by step. All right. So I'm going to add a request filtering rule just for the ISAPI application. All right. Go end this tag. All right. And I am going to start adding some rules. All right. All right. So here's request filtering, and these tags as well. So I have something base to start off with. All right. And that should take care of this. Oops. Oh, guess I didn't copy it just right. Let's try that again. Did I have system web server? Let me just copy this entire section down until here. All right. And let's try that again. All right. I'm just going to remove things that I don't need. All right. So one of the things that you probably notice is that my application, it essentially just sleeps for a number of milliseconds, and you pass the argument in on the query string. So I can ask it to sleep for 100 milliseconds, and sure enough, it'll sleep for 100 milliseconds, right? So one of the things that you'll immediately notice is that the argument I'm passing is just a number, right? So I don't want my query string to be extremely long. So let's just see if you can just quickly write a request filter rule that will help me limit the length of my query string. So I'm going to quickly go into application host.config. and there's a request limit section, and there's a bunch of things that you can tweak around here, right? The maximum size of a URL and a bunch of other things. But in this case, let's just restrict our max query string, and let's just say it's a small number. Let's just make it 2. Right? Save this guy out, and immediately I don't have to reset anything. I don't have to restart the server. Instantaneously takes effect. So let's start with 10, and sure enough, it's deep for 10 milliseconds. And let's try something a little larger, 1,000. And sure enough, since I'm a local admin on this machine, I get the nice little custom errors, and it tells me that the request filtering module denied me this request because the query string was too long. Right? I specified that I'll only accept 2 characters on it. So that's all. That's cool. But let's see if we can just tighten this a little further as well. So let's say that I want to make sure that this is an ISAPI DLL. I want to make sure that people don't do anything funky with it, like issuing put requests or things of that nature. So one of the things that we can do is we can just quickly add this section right here. And what this does is it lets you specify the verbs that you want to be allowed on this application, right? And over here what I'm saying is allow unlisted false, so allow only the ones that I list underneath me, and I add get, and that's the only thing that will be allowed, right? So I can really issue this request through IE, so I'm going to bring up this little tool called wfetch, and it just lets me just engineer a raw request. So let me go here and change my request from a get request to, let's say, a head request, and hit go. And sure enough, I get a 404 not found status. Obviously, I don't get the cool little custom error that I get in IE with the substatus code. But if I were to get a substatus code, then I'll probably see that I had a 404.16 as well over here. So that's cool. So now we have made sure that our query string cannot be more than 2 characters. We've also made sure that we will not allow any requests other than a get request. So if I go to my directory, let's go up to ISAPI. I have some text files, some foo.txt, right? And I want this to be visible only to admins, right? I want to make sure that people, other people don't have access to it, right? But every time I add or remove files, I don't want to make sure that I want to write such a rule that I don't have to enforce per content, right? I don't want to have, like, if someone adds bar.txt, I don't want to have them ACL things differently on bar.txt so people are not able to see it, right? I just want to do it simply through request filtering, because since I already have request filtering rules for this. So what we'll do is we will just add a file extensions rule, and what we will do is I'm just going to quickly copy the section here from here, and I'm going to paste it right here. All right. And so what I've done here is I will allow all file extensions, right, with the exception of .txt files, right? So if you issue a request to a .txt file, you won't get it. Actually, before I do this really quick, let me just remove this. Oops, didn't quite remove it. All right, cool. Let's just go quickly and see if I can actually access the file or not, right? So with ISAPI foo.txt, sure enough, I get foo.txt. And now let's go back, and we'll add that line back in. Save this file. Go back. Let's issue the request again. Oh, okay, IE caching. All right, let's just make sure we start IE again, so it doesn't cache the page for me. ISAPI foo.txt. Oh, and sure enough, I get a detail error that says request filtering module is configured to deny the particular file extension. And these are just some few of the rules that I've shown you here, right? I mean, you can just make this, you can make them as complicated as they actually want them to, based on just very simple rules. And you can actually, and as I mentioned, like the thing, I have this rule applied only to a particular application, right? So location tag is a great way to differentiate between different applications, right? Say I'm a hoster, and I want to allow my premium customers to do more things than I want to allow my my standard customers from doing, then this is a great way to go about doing it, right? I can have some default settings in my application host.config that will isolate using location paths. I'll have a particular path for premier customers and a particular path for standard customers, and I'll have one location where I store all the information that I need, right? And again, it's simple enough, Xcopy deployable. I can back it up, and one of the cool things also is that you can actually make backups of your application host.config files as well. So for people who are used to using this little tool called appcmd, let's see if I have appcmd on the path. I don't have appcmd on my path right now. I'm going to quickly go add appcmd on my path. Properties. I'm going to go advanced system settings, environment variables. Here's my path. Edit it. And I'm going to add C: Windows System 32 INET serve. Can't type correct. All right, and that should bring appcmd on my path. Just quickly show you how to use appcmd as well. All right, let's just run command shell again. All right. Oh, small double up. Let's go to INET pub. All right. Make sure I have appcmd. I do. All right. So appcmd is a cool little command line tool that lets you just access things in your configuration, right? So I can do things like appcmd list sites, for instance, and it'll actually list me all the sites that I have, and we have pretty good documentation on this as well, right? All the different things that you can do. So you can list sites or apps. You can do things with virtual directories, pools. You can directly get configuration sections. You can actually monitor requests, modules, all sorts of stuff, right? And one of the cool things is you can do actually a backup. So let's say appcmd backup. Let's see, it's foo dot cfg. Oh, okay. I gotta say config first. I want to backup config to foo. So backup not supported in config. I probably just don't have the syntax right. In either case, we can use the backup feature just to back up your configuration, and also it's a cool way to have multiple copies. And if you want to swap between different modes, let's say I have one mode when I'm running in a web farm mode, I want to have one sort of configuration applied, and then when I'm running in an isolated mode, I want to have another sort of configuration applied. And say I have a mode to switch between integrated pipeline, and then I switch out to running in classic mode. So I can have different config files for each one of these. I can easily just swap them around, back them up, so I can save my state between these guys as well. So that's a nifty little feature as well. And again, everything's Xcopy deployable because it's all XML. All right, moving on. Server core. All right, so Server core is essentially a minimal installation option for Windows Server 2008. It's available with a bunch of the SKUs that are out there. And Server core is available both for x86 and x64. You basically get no shell. It's all command line based. You have a minimal set of components installed. And so, there's some obvious benefits to Server core, right? So most of the times you see out there, people have very fixed roles for their servers, right? I might have a server that just serves out PHP content using fastCGI, and pretty much does nothing else, right? I don't want Active Directory. I don't want people browsing on Internet Explorer. I mean, it's just a very core server. I don't want Internet Explorer, things of that nature, right? And all these features that are just added on by default, they just increase your attack surface. And not just that, I mean, it just has a bunch of stuff that it automatically loads into memory for you. It slows things down as well. So it's both a security and a performance burden. And what Server core does is it essentially removes both of those problems for you, right? So now you have a smaller surface area because you just have really core DLL. You just have all the basics in your server. And so essentially what this means is that you have fewer patching to do. Some of the testing that were done in the labs showed as like the amount of patching that you would decrease to about by 60% if you had server core installations. And obviously servicing would not be as much a burden as well. And obviously, if you're patching fewer things, then that obviously increases the reliability of your machine as well. So there's that benefit as well. So here's a quick set of things that server core actually has, right? It has all the core subsystems, right? So you have your logon, your networking stack, your file system, RPC. You have you have a bunch of infrastructure as well. You have command shell. You do not have .NET Framework yet on server core, but you have a whole bunch of other stuff. You have all event log, perf counter stuff. You have IPsec. And it's pretty easy to maintain the stuff. Essentially, you have a little tool called OC Setup, OC standing for Optional Component, and it essentially gives you a nice little tree view of dependencies on of different components. So, and then you can actually just browse down the tree hierarchy and see exactly what you need, and it'll let you know that if you drag something in, what else will that drag in with it, right? So there's no it's not really you never encounter a situation where you try to install one thing and it just installs a bunch of other things that you didn't know about. It actually lets you visualize exactly what you're going to get on your machine. And that's server core. So just to briefly summarize what we've talked about, so we've just IIS7 has built on the successes that IIS6 already has, right? We just improved the architecture, polished things up a little bit, right? We still have the same process model, but we have minimized the attack surface. We have improved things like isolation, which previously used to be site-based. We've improved it even more, taken it one step further. We provide like application pool level isolation now. We've done a whole bunch of perf optimizations as well, both IIS7 and Windows Server 2008. And also there's a whole bunch of like architectural elements to it that make it very appealing as well, right? So we talked about some of them, like the componentization, and how you can actually use that to make your server more lean and mean, so to say. There's a whole bunch of compression features that we have in there. Server core makes it more compelling as well. And to top it all off, we have like pretty much one management story for this site. You launch iNet Manager and you can manage everything from there. You don't have to write multiple scripts or multiple tools to manage different sections of your different sections of your server. And the best thing is that everything on the back end is just XML. So everything is just Xcopy deployable. So if you built a web form and you wanted to have all your configurations stored in the central location for all your web form, it's very, very simple to do. And you can just do it through the user interface. You don't even have to write any script to enable that. And well, that's the end of my talk. If people have any questions, I'll be glad to take questions and answer any questions at this point.
Okay, Nazem, this is Isaac Roybal, and I'm the product manager for our IIS within Windows Server.
All right. Yeah.
And we've been having some great questions here that I want to kick over to you and see what you have. So one of the first ones here is talking about the request filtering portion of your talk.
Yes.
And talking about, since it's the filtering rules are in the XML config file, which is in the application host.config.
Mm-hmm.
The question is around, does that mean that each application could have its own rules, more flexible than, say, a single URL INI file?
Yes, you can, right? And you can also like change the level of visibility, right? Say that I'm a server admin, right? As I said, let's go back to the previous example: Premier customer and standard customer. I don't have very strict conditions for the standard customer, but I'll let the Premier customers have more leeway. So in my application host.config, I will just separate those out using location tags, and then specify different request filtering rules for both of them. And so now every time a request goes into one of those two different buckets, you actually will get different request filtering happening on the server end. So yeah, absolutely, you can absolutely do that.
All right, and then we have another question around talking about app pools and the new security changes around the built-in users.
Sure.
So it's around basically an app pool. So say that this particular question is around an app pool and a worker process. So they want to know if they have to add, if their app pool is running under a domain account, do they have to add that domain user account to IIS_users for it to be able to work?
No, you don't. Right? It's automatically picked up on the fly. Right? So essentially, what you do. Let me just going to go back quickly to my little VPC image. All right. So if you go into INET Manager, right? One of the cool things that you can just do is if you go to your application pool section, and let's say my control pool, and I will just advanced settings. One of the cool things that you can do is you can just choose a particular identity that you want to run your little pool under, right? And so here, if I just click here, I can actually take custom account, and in here I can have any sort of account one. So I can have domain credentials, I can have non-domain credentials. If I'm validating things against a SQL store, I can actually have my own authentication provider that I write for that, and I can do that as well. So I can validate against a SQL store if you want. So yeah, all this stuff is just absolutely easy to maintain and do.
Okay, so you don't have to have it in the local group of
Nope. Yeah, we definitely wanted to avoid that, right? Because that's just extra maintenance, right? You having to manually add things. What IIS does is that we have a built-in group called ISI users, and on the fly we add the identities that your worker process runs as into this group, right? So let's say I delete an application pool that was running under a special identity. Sure enough, that identity will never get added to your ISI users group again, right? It just makes it makes it very easy. You don't have to do all the maintenance anymore. Back in the day, you had these specific users and you had to maintain these users. None of that anymore.
Okay, perfect. The next one comes around talking about the FastCGI module.
Yep.
And this particular person is having an issue with FastCGI and the CGI module on the same server.
Okay.
And he's receiving a 503 error.
A 500 dot what?
503.
Okay.
Every time he tries to run them both in tandem. And he says it seems like they are competing somewhere. Do you know of any particular reason why that might be happening?
Not really. But I mean, so the best thing to do is use Freb, right? I mean, I talked about Freb really quickly, right? One of the things you can really do really quickly is, let me just go back. Okay, so let's just say I have some application. Here's my SAP application. Pretty easy. Go back to my default website. There's a little thing on the right-hand side. Advanced settings, I think. Oh, or do I need to go back to my server? Oh, actually, I don't have Freb installed on this machine. This is what the problem is. So Freb actually is a separate module as well. But if you had Freb installed, what you would see is on the right-hand side, in this actions pane, you would actually see something to turn on failed request event buffering. And then you would actually go into your particular application, which actually which gets those 503 errors. And you'd see a little icon, and you'd actually specify rules. And your Freb rule would look like, well, any application that returns a 503 error back, just trace it. And essentially what happens is that you will have a nice little XML file in your INET pub directory under logs. You'll have something in there. And it's got a little XSL style sheet template applied to it, and you can just, it has a lot of detailed error information in there. And that should be pretty easy to diagnose a 503 based on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to that as well is the detailed error messages that come by default in IIS7. So the person that's asking this is Chris. I'm sorry, Randy.
Mm-hmm.
So you can also, Randy, you can also use the detailed error messages found right there, exactly what you're seeing on your screen right there.
Yep.
They can tell you, excuse me, what most likely the cause is and things you can try to fix that. Now, I'm not particularly sure why they would be throwing a 503, service unavailable error like that. I would just double check to make sure that the app pools are running and just simple things like that. That sometimes can lead to some of these issues.
Right, and a lot of times these issues are actually just like installation or setup sort of issues as well, right? FastCGI is an out-of-band sort of module, and people just install over others, and they might actually have some issues in their ini files for the FastCGI install as well. So it might just be a configuration or a setup issue as well. But even then, even if that's the case, it'll actually tell you in your Freb log.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the greatest features that I love about IIS7 compared to the troubleshooting tools that we had in the past.
Yep.
The failed request tracing is absolutely amazing.
Yep, absolutely.
So we have another one about identities and app pools. Can the auto add of app pool identity to IIS users be disabled? Saying this is
So,
potentially
let me.
Sarbanes-Oxley audit issue.
Okay, so I guess I'll try to rephrase the question. I guess so. The question basically is if so by default we inject this identity right in the worker process, the application pool identity. Can we actually turn that off? Currently, it's a security feature, and there's no way you can actually turn it off.
Yeah, no. I think the question is basically, and it may be stated wrong, or maybe I responded wrong earlier, misquoted it earlier, was this. What I'm reading this is the assumption is that the app pool identity, whatever it's running under, say it's a network account,
oh, right,
automatically being added to the IIS_users local account, which it is not, correct?
Yes, it is not.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So basically, yeah, I mean, essentially just to give things access to things that you need, right? I mean, if you have your website set up, right, and you have enabled anonymous authentication, right, so you need your anonymous user just access to all the resources that you have on your website, and that's what the mechanism is meant for, right? The auto add to the ISI users group is meant to facilitate that, right? So it's not really a security hole or anything like that.
Perfect. Now we have one in terms of performance. Does it help performance to cache server side code and DLLs?
I don't really have any numbers on that. My guess would be that it would help some, I'm sure, but obviously it depends on the scenario, right? I mean, it really depends on the layout of your application and the server and what kind of requests. What was your profile? What was your request profile as well? So there's a lot of factors that play into a lot of these things, right? But once again, you can. So another like a plug for FREB, right? One of the things in FREB is that you can actually take you can actually do FREB logging based on time taken for a request as well, right? So that's another cool way to actually look at, and one of the views in your XSL style sheet is a performance view, and it'll essentially list you in decreasing order on time taken during different events. So if you want to optimize things, you just put it in that view, and you go down and you see exactly where you're taking a lot of the time, and you can definitely optimize things that way as well, right? And so one of the things that you can experiment with is try caching the server-side TLLs, before and after, and just enable FREB logging and see exactly where you're saving time, how much time you're saving, whether you can improve on it or not. So it'll be a cool little experiment.
Great, thank you. Now we have another one about URL rewrite modules. So is there going to be a URL rewrite module similar to mod_rewrite in Apache? I know it won't be too difficult to create a custom module, but is MS going to provide a supported?
Eventually, yes, we are. So we have a whole bunch of out-of-band projects that we are working on currently. URL rewrite is definitely very high on the priority list on that one. So yes, I would say that a pretty high. It's very likely that we would actually do a URL rewrite module for IIS7. But again, it will be shipped out of band, and it'll just be available and download for download on IIS.net whenever we ship it.
Yeah, and that'll be off of IIS.net WAC download.
Yes.
All right, perfect. So it looks like so far that's cleared the queue. I don't recall any other questions in terms of recurring themes. So everyone, if you still have some questions, now's the time to answer them. You have us live here. We can pick up the questions and answer them live to you right now, and then we'll type them in as well just for record if you want to review this later on down the line. But now, while we're waiting for that, Nazim, is there any other points that you'd like to cover, or topics, or areas of interest that?
Yeah. So there's, we have very limited time to go over some of the features over here, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff as well out there, right? But once again, right, a lot of these things are about how you administer your sites. We've given you the tools. We have a great config story. We have a great configuration manager. and pretty much, we ask you to use these tools and make sure you do the right things as well, right? Like the example is the default document thing, right? That's a very simple thing, but if you misconfigure that, you're going to take a perf hit. So, yep.
All right. Well, so far it looks like that's it. As of now, I mean, we still have a few more moments. I mean, more than probably about 10 minutes if you guys still have some questions around performance, security, tuning, anything like that. Now's a great time to ask that. And also, during this time, I just wanted to make everyone aware that we're going to be having another webcast. So again, the entire month of October is dedicated to IIS7. And we're going to have another webcast on Thursday, this Thursday, I believe that is October 11th, and it will be starting at 9:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and it'll be about deploying and managing web farms with IIS7. So there's some great new features in IIS7 that allow for simple administration and deployment in a web farm scenario, which I'm sure many of you have or will have eventually in your architecture and your infrastructure. So with that, it still looks like there's no more questions. Is there anything else just top of mind that you wanted to cover? I know obviously it was there's a lot of items here to cover and really talking about some stuff, but it looks like you have some appendix slides. Maybe you want to kind of cover some of those things?
Yeah, I mean, if you want, we can just quickly go into the details of how we actually do things for application pool isolation. If people are actually interested in technical details, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that'd be great to cover, especially
Sure.
due to the fact that we've changed the application pool isolation model in IIS7 compared to 6, and it's set by default now, and I think that's
Absolutely.
showing those
Yeah,
signals.
I think that would be helpful.
Yeah,
so, all right. Now, a quick little slide here on how IIS7 architecture looks like. Right. So you have configuration, which is not only application host.config. It's also your isolated configuration files. So in the application pool isolation case, I showed you those different config files like fabricam pool.config. So you have store. You have WAS and WCSBC's services hosted here, and then you have your worker process running in a separate process, right? And then down a layer below, you have HTTP/SES, which is in kernel mode. And so essentially, what a request flow would look like is, we read stuff from your. So when WAS kicks off, it sucks up all your binding information from your application host.config and kicks off a new worker process, and it actually initiates a request queue, passes on your binding information to http.sys, and after this, your WAS has enough. WAS has basically the port open and listening on http/sys, and on the other side, it'll actually go and launch your new worker process. And now the worker process can essentially directly communicate with http/sys. And essentially, we can, WAS is sort of like an extendable activation service. So you can actually use WAS for, let's say, Indigo services as well, or if you have some custom SOAP over TCP that you want to implement, you could use WAS for doing that as well. I have a few details about HTTP/sys, queuing, caching, some of the new features.
And also just a quick, just add in a quick point that from an IT pro perspective, in terms of comparison to IIS6 to 7.
Mm-hmm.
So in IIS6, basically everything was, you created a new site, for example, and it was stuffed into the default app pool. And then if you wanted to put that site in a separate app pool, you had to go create that app pool and then move that site over at a later time. Yep. Whereas in IIS7 today, now it's automatically done for you once you create the site. So there's automatic application pool sandboxing for sites and applications. You don't have to go through those 3 or 4 other steps that you had to in IIS6.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And also another thing that's interesting in terms of the architecture changes from the application pool that I found interesting is that each application pool at runtime gets its own temporary application, or gets its own application pool config file.
Yes.
That is keyed specifically to that application pool. So it's there's a GUID that ties the two together, so they're completely isolated from one another. And the analogy that we always use is that you could actually put Coke and Pepsi's secret formulas on the same web server, and they would not be able to share any kind of information.
Yep. And yep, if anytime you want to see your the actual config files, they're under inet pub temp app pools, and you can see all the stuff there, and you can list out all the access controls on it as well. And sure enough, you will see that we inject the SID for your application pools in here. So if you see that this config file, anonymous users don't really have access to it. It's only your application pool that has access to it. So even another application pool could not access your config data. So let's say you had some encrypted information. Say you had user credentials for connecting to a SQL store in there, and another app pool cannot get to it, even if you have the app pools hosted on the same site.
Yeah, and that's huge in terms of security. I think that's really big, especially in the enterprise. When you talk about intranet deployments and you have one or two web servers or maybe even a web farm that are hosting, say, all of your HR-specific information as well as your finance information for your company, you obviously don't want any of that information shared across the two different app pools, and you can host all that on one server. And that's also very beneficial in a hosting environment as well. Say when you're doing a mass shared hosting environment or something of that sort. You have 1,000 sites, each one of them is completely isolated from one another. So let's see if we have any more questions. Nope, it looks like it's about it. So with that, Nazem, I'll pass it back over to you to wrap this up and close the loop. And thank you very much for doing this.
Thanks. Thank you so much. All right, thanks, guys. It's fun chatting with you. All right, Tracy, you can take over, I guess.
Excellent. Thanks, Nazem. All right, now just as a reminder to everybody, you can print a PDF of today's session. To do that, you just want to go to the File menu in your upper navigation bar. Also, if you do have any remaining questions, feel free to submit those into our Q&A panel by typing them in and hit that Ask button. Also, I'm going to be posting a survey here in just a minute. If you would all please take a moment to fill that out before you log off. We do appreciate your feedback. And for upcoming and previously recorded webcasts, you can visit Microsoft.com/webcast. You can go here to access this webcast, which will be available for download in about 24 hours. And if you have any webcast content ideas, something out there you'd like to see and haven't yet, we'd love to hear from you. Just take note of this link here. And now here's the survey from our session today. Please follow the links provided to complete today's webcast evaluation. And with that, I do want to extend a very special thank you to Nazem for your presentation today and answering all the great questions we had come through the queue. Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to conclude today's session. I want to thank you again for joining us. You may now disconnect from the audio portion of today's presentation.